Yeah, yeah. Making her way to the mic. They start dimming the lights. You start feeling alright. From Birmingham, home of the Teddy Longs and the Ruben Studders. More once you discover. For all of the lovers of Whitney Houston and Roman Reigns. For all of the lovers of Mickey James and Marvin Gaye. For all of the lovers of Sasha Banks, Janelle Monáe, Silk, Sonic, and Paige. Allow me to say, look, I just found a place, sweet escape. Every one of us. I was kinda late, so I just made it off the struggle bus. Walking by the fate, cause I know it's right in front of us. Yo, I ain't with the hate, gotta focus on what's great. Ladies and gentlemen, Steph Hardy is on the air. Had to drop a couple bars just to make you all aware. So, sit back, relax, enjoy the show. You know I go by Joe or the rest of the flow, yeah.
Hey, welcome to the Hardy Wrestling Podcast with your girl Stephanie Hardy. Of course, if this is your first time listening or watching, thank you for watching on this Sunday evening. And of course, if this isn't your first time listening or watching, thank you for continuing to support the Hardy Wrestling Podcast brand. It is so good to be back after me traveling to Los Angeles Comic-Con and getting all of that stuff together for the Women of Color in Wrestling panel. So I'm so glad to be back here on this show. But I have a special guest with me. He is an amazing wrestler who I have been looking into and someone who I have been tipped into talking to by Gabby Gilbert, who is an accomplished wrestler in her own right. And he calls himself the top guy. And he's going to be having an amazing match coming up this week, like literally this coming weekend, with the iconic KENTA at CZW Live in New Jersey. So, welcome to the Hardy Wrestling Podcast, Griffin McCoy. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on. That's an awesome intro that you have. I was like, oh, this is a good song. And then like, oh, it's a custom song. Oh, this is great. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Josiah Williams from Wrestle and Flow did it, and I am so proud of it every day. It is such a good song, and I just love the intro done by Simon Vision. So it's just a good way to intro everything and just to recreate the opening of the podcast. So I just wanted it to be a little bit stylistic, just a little bit cool. Yeah. So I'm glad you liked it. It's great.
Oh, loved it.
Thank you so much. So let's send it back to you now. So Griffin, when did you fall in love with wrestling and want to pursue it?
The first instance that I really saw wrestling was a little bit different than most. It wasn't Monday Night Raw. It was not SmackDown. It was not TNA. It wasn't anything else. It was in a movie, critically acclaimed, to me, one of the greatest movies of all time, Nacho Libre, starring Jack Black, the man himself. Yes. That was the first time I ever saw like pro wrestling in general. You know, even though it was a comedy movie, but it was, it was based around professional wrestling, and it was based on the true story of a priest who became a professional wrestler, luchador, to help his parish, which I found was very cool. But it was the first time I ever saw professional wrestling. And, at that time, Jack Black was a god among men. He was one of the best comedic actors in the world. So, seeing that movie, I was like, oh, wow, this is like really cool, this pro wrestling thing. And then ever since that point in time, I just started noticing wrestling a lot more. Like, I saw kids at school with like WWE backpacks, and then like I go to the arcade and there was this Royal Rumble video game that I loved to play. And I was playing that all the time. I would be like The Rock or like Big Show or like Undertaker. And it was just like some arcade game. So I did start playing that. And I'm originally from San Francisco, and I lived in San Diego for a little bit. So like, lucha wrestling is like huge. Like it's just like a part of like the culture, because we're so close. We share the border with Mexico and stuff. And, you'd always see like people like selling like luchador masks and like all that kind of stuff. So like I started seeing that more and more. But like obviously growing up on the West Coast, Raw is at like 5 p.m. or something like that. So it's like, it's kind of hard to like find it on TV. But then I moved to Philadelphia when I was 10 years old. And then, I started like flipping through channels and I found like Raw. And I started like watching more then. And then, I started watching, Netflix was kind of like really popping off. And Netflix had a whole WWE section at the time. And so they had like, they had like so many documentaries. Like they had like CM Punk's documentary, like Batista, Randy Orton. I started watching those. They had like the best of like Raw and SmackDown, 2009, 2010, 2011. I watched all those. They had like a DX documentary. They had the Ultimate Hulk Hogan anthology, which is 3 volumes of like, it's like 8 hours long of like Hulk Hogan matches. And I remember I spent like, like a whole summer like watching that. So I like, it was kind of like around 9 to 10 years old is when I really just started like becoming a huge wrestling fan.
Okay, so you had a very unconventional start. You got into it with a movie, but a lot of people really don't give a lot of credit to wrestling in movies a lot because wrestling is its own entity and they have their own content. But then a lot of people sort of underestimate, wrestling's, ability to bleed into other forms of pop culture. So the fact that you found it, via Nacho Libre is a pretty amazing story, and I think it's very valid that you found it that way. And Jack Black kind of was a god among men. He was everywhere at that point in time. Like you couldn't miss. It's like every other comedy movie with a dabble of drama, he was in it. And yeah. And so I think that's very valid. And the fact that you moved from basically across the country from California to Philadelphia and still kept on with it, as you found it, which is just a really amazing thing. And then, of course, you have the video game component of it, too, because I love that I'm meeting more people who are saying that they got into wrestling via video games. I love that that's happening to me now because I've heard multiple stories over the past couple of months about that.
Yeah, no, I love like pretty much anything that I got really into as like, even like now to a certain extent, like if I find like a really cool video game, like, I got into basketball because I started playing like NBA at like a cousin's house. Or it was like, started playing football because I started playing Madden, or like, baseball because I was playing like MLB The Show. But like, like those like video games, like they really do, like it's cool how the crossover of like mediums like can really inspire you, and like really like get you interested in like certain other things. So, like I know like, it does not so much anymore because everyone loves video games. But like as younger, like, oh, why are you playing like video games? Like, oh, like I can learn a bunch of cool things from video games. You really can open your eyes to different things. I've like learned a lot, like non-ironically from video games. So I love them.
Yeah, I love them too. Except I kind of like fighting video games more. So those are the ones where you can get away with just pressing buttons and then just seeing what works that way. As opposed to having like a whole strategy. Like that's my favorite type of thing. Like seriously. So when did you decide that you wanted to pursue it as a career?
I think what really made me want to pursue it, it was kind of like, it was like a few things over like a period of time. I think one thing that like really got me like going like, dang, like I really should like, I think I could do it is I saw Triple H's documentary. It came out when I was in like 7th grade. And it was Thy Kingdom Come. And like Triple H is my favorite wrestler of all time. He's like my number one. And but like watching his documentary and like kind of seeing his journey and like his like background, like I kind of like it was one of the most that are like really similar to mine, I guess. I was just like growing up, I just played sports. I was like a pretty normal kid, I just like, always an athlete, always just playing sports. I was always into like lifting weights as a young guy. So I'd really just like connected with that. And I was like, you know what, like if he can do it, you don't have to necessarily come from like a super extraordinary background, like it could just be like like anyone could really become a pro wrestler if they really like put their mind to it. So that's what, seeing that like documentary, I started doing amateur wrestling. I started doing amateur wrestling like middle school. I did like a little bit in high school. And then it wasn't until I met he's still one of my best friends to this day, Jordan Oliver, who's a pro wrestler, if anyone knows that guy. But me and my friends, we met him, and he was like already wrestling at the time. And he was able to get us in like a couple rings and like show us how to do like like basic things. And around senior year, my other friends who were all part of Young Dumb and Broke, my friends Ellis Taylor and Charlie Tiger, they started going to wrestling training with Jordan. And they were like, hey, if we're going, what's your excuse? So senior year, I started training to become a pro wrestler, and it's been 5 years since then. I haven't stopped.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Wait, do you got me now? You don't got
I can.
I wonder if anyone can see me right now. Just Griff. Maybe I took over the stream now. Who knows? It's Griffin McCoy hour on the podcast, holding it down. That'd be really funny. I hope so. I hope it's just me and everyone's looking at. We back?
Yeah, I'm back. Oh my God, were you still on live this whole time?
Yeah, I think I was. I might have just been talking to the camera. I'm like,
Oh
hey,
my Lord, I am so sorry. I thought I had
it's all
ended it
good.
because the internet was acting up on my end. I'm so sorry. I am
No, you're
sorry,
fine. You're
guys.
fine.
I am the host, and Griffin was the host for just a few seconds.
They saw me just staring at my phone, freaking out, like, oh my God.
Yeah, I was freaking out too because I was just like, I don't know what's going on. But it looks like we're back. We are back. So let's go back to what you were saying about you decided to get into wrestling as a career. You said that Triple H was your inspiration after watching one of his documentaries, and you felt like if he could do it, then you can do it. And then you got together with a friend who was taking you to wrestling rings, right?
Yes. I got
Okay.
with my boy Jordan Oliver. He was taking me to, this was all right. So this is like, I'm like 16 at the time, 16, 17, like getting snuck into rings. We got snuck onto a couple of like actual pro wrestling shows. Um, but it wasn't until I turned 18. I was senior year of high school. My friends pulled me aside and they're like, "Hey, we're like training every week. There's no
Hmm.
reason for you not to become trained because we know that you want to become a pro wrestler. We're doing it. There's no reason that you shouldn't be doing it with us. So I started training with that Combat Zone Wrestling, which is where I'm still wrestling. We're wrestling next Sunday against KENTA.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started training senior year. That was 2018, and it's been I just hit like 5 years in pro wrestling. So what a way to celebrate, eh?
Yeah. So you started immediately, like around 16 or 17 years old.
Mhm.
Like, that's really early, but I think that's really good though, because if you're starting then you're continuing to do it now. And then, of course, you have that conditioning for it, in terms of your body and all of the work that you're doing athletically to prepare for it, right? So you knew almost immediately that this is what you wanted to do.
Yeah, no, as soon as I got to like high school age where it was like, oh, like you're gonna have to start thinking about like what you want to do for the rest of your life. Like not
Of
really, but
course.
like you have to like start like figuring it out. And I've always loved sports. I've always been like, involved in some way. But I don't know, just like getting to a certain stage of like, having like baseball was always my number one sport. I played travel baseball all the time. If I wasn't like doing like wrestling or anything else, like I was playing baseball.
Hmm.
And it gets to a point where you're putting in so much work and like you hit that awkward stage of like puberty where your body is like no longer, it's just like it got lanky and like awkward, and I was like, you know what, man, like I don't know if I love baseball the way that I used to love it. And like as I got less into baseball, like wrestling became more of what I was into, which is kind of funny too because most people are like really into wrestling like younger, and then
Hmm.
when they get to like high school they kind of like phase out and they come back to it. But like me, it was like I never really saw it when I was young. Well, like when I got to like high school, like and like that was the time I got really into it. And the way it happened is just like the opportunity presented itself to like, hey, like if you want to do this, like you're 30 minutes away from like a very well renowned school, and you can like train and like train at where a lot of like really phenomenal pro wrestlers have trained or like at least wrestled at some point in their career. So I was like, you know what, like let's give it a shot. And going in, it was just like it felt like riding a bike after not riding for years. It just felt like what I was meant to do. And every time I step in the ring, like no matter what's been going on in my life or how nervous I am for a match or whatever the situation is, as soon as I get in the ring, nothing else matters. It is just an entire
Hmm.
flow state. So I just love it. It's just what I feel like I'm put on this earth to do, at least for the time, until my body breaks down. It is what I'm meant to do for the time being.
Of course, that's very beautiful. So, what would you say are some of the best lessons you learned while you were training?
Oh man, probably the best lesson I learned is that you ain't shit. No matter how, no matter how cool you think you are, no matter how good you think you're gonna be, once you start training, and especially in this past year, like this has been really like self-evident. Like you are only gonna get as far or progress as much as you push yourself. Like
Right.
you are not gonna make any progress if you don't force yourself to make progress. Like it's not a like and like that's obviously that carries into life as well. Like life is pushing yourself to be put in these really uncomfortable situations. And it sounds easy, like when you say it out loud. It's like, oh yeah, put yourself in a situation you're not comfortable with, and like just do your thing and do well. But like really putting yourself into like that kind of setting is like, oh my god, so anxiety ridden. Or like or just like so like like working out hard, it's tough. Everyone's had to work out hard a couple times, even for gym class. When you wanted to run a mile, you didn't want to run a mile, like it sucks, and that's like your daily life. Like train 2 to 3 times a day, and it's just like it's brutal. But
Hmm.
that's that's the only way you can progress in life. Even if I wanted to be a doctor or a dentist or a lawyer or whatever, like I would have had to study. I would have had to take. I'm still in school right now, but I'm not becoming a doctor. But you have to force yourself to study. You have to force yourself to get internships, or force yourself to go through these terrible exams. Or force yourself to work like these really long hours so you can progress to a certain level that you want to be at. That's just the way that life is. And just pro wrestling training and just working out and all that stuff, that's probably the biggest lesson and biggest takeaway that I've gotten from training.
Yeah, that's a funny way that you put that at first, because I was like, wait, what? But essentially, you do have to work hard in order to be able to get better and prove yourself, that you belong, and not even just that you belong, but just to get better if you truly care about what it is you're doing, and not stay complacent. Because if you did stay complacent, then no one would know that you care a lot if you just stayed in the same place that you were in. So I am glad that you were able to apply that to your life and in everything that you do, so you can, get better. And even with you mentioning this past year, like in your wrestling career, like how were you able to adapt to all of the changes that have taken place within the past 2 years, especially with the pandemic and everything happening?
Honestly, I think I would have much preferred probably not to, or not for the entire globe to go through a pandemic, because obviously it's not a great thing to go through a pandemic, but just for the silver lining aspect, the pandemic was really a time that I was able to look inside myself, and which a lot of people did too. You're just trapped with your own thoughts, and you contemplate, because at that point I was 3 years into wrestling,
Hmm.
and it was going pretty darn well. I was able to wrestle all across the country. My momentum was really picking up as part of Young, Dumb, and Broke. But the pandemic hit, and I've always had great ambition in my heart since a kid. I've had a lot of goals that I wanted to sit out and do. They're very lofty and very hard to reach, but that's the kind of stuff I've always wanted to do. And up until that point, I was definitely working hard, but I didn't have the level of work ethic that I have now. And during that time in the pandemic, I really took it upon myself to take a chance on myself to kind of you know establish a new identity, put something forward, put forth my true self, not really hide behind you know my friends, or hide behind a persona, but really put out who I am as a person. This is Griffin McCoy, Griffin McCoy is me. I want to be a top guy. Top guy is a mantra. It's not just a title. It's a standard that I live by. It's something that drives me, because I do want to be that one day. I do want to be able to reach a certain point, in pro wrestling and life, where it's damn, everything that he said he wanted to do, he has done it and more. So with the pandemic, it was just a time to really say hey, it's scary to want to push yourself and try to achieve those kinds of things. But I said, you know what, it can't be scarier than possibly dying from a disease or going into nuclear war. So, might as well give it a shot.
Definitely. I 100% get that. And with the pandemic, there have been so many people, so many wrestlers who have been able to, sort of use that time to sort of get to know themselves and bounce back in order to, and also um, carve out what they want to be in wrestling, and just finding new ways to sort of innovate who they are as performers. So it's really great that you utilize that time in order to get to know yourself and then realize, what more you want to do in your career. So that's very admirable. And I like that you were on that part of your journey. So would you say that you
Thank you.
have, yeah, would you say that you have a really good fan base since you've been in wrestling? And what have been some really cool experiences you've had with your fans?
Yeah, you know what? The fan base, especially recently, has been growing a lot more, which is awesome. But I do have there's a handful of fans who have seen me since I was 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. And they've been supporting the entire time. And that is like the coolest thing ever, like, like you watch like YouTube or something, you watch like a certain like channel and it's like, oh, I like all to my day ones, like, I really appreciate it. I'm like, oh yeah, like whatever. But like, now being at a point where like, oh man, I've had people who have like really seen me like grow up and like who have like been around me and like, who have like been on shows where I've been in front of like, just them and like a handful of other people. And they see me on shows where I'm in front of like hundreds of people. And like, that is a really cool thing because they can like, when like, fans will always come up and say like, good job or whatever. And that's always super awesome. But when you see like those people and they're like, hey man, like it's crazy how far you've come. And it's like, that's just like a really cool thing where it's like, wow, you've really been able to see like the progression. Like you have definitely seen me at my worst. And now you're seeing me like come up, which is awesome. But couple fan things that specific interactions. I mean, I might be able to spin this real quick, but there's this one fan. It's him and his son, but they did this drawing that I have in my room. I know this is like kind of cockeyed, but yeah, it's like an old promo picture, but like, it's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. So that is probably like one of the cooler fan like interactions that I've had because like I love that stuff. I love when people make like pictures or they make art. Like I think that's just like the coolest thing ever. So I love that creativity kind of come into play.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's always really great when you start something, you don't know exactly who it's going to touch or who it's going to, impact. And it's really great when you work such a long time and then you have people who are watching you. And then once they see how you've grown and they stick with you from the very beginning, all when you thought you weren't doing as well, all the way till now where you're doing a little bit better than you once were, and they're watching you and then they see you and you're just like, you know what, I like what you do and I appreciate it, and they continue to want to stay with you. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I love that fan and his son actually made that sign of you. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Like,
super
fans
cool.
can be so creative. Like, we can just be so creative when it comes to utilizing our gifts to sort of make someone else feel good in terms of our fandom. I just love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, of course. I love it too. Like, I love like fan drawn like artwork or whatever. Like, as like like looking up to like some other wrestlers and they get like cool like stuff drawn for them or like cool artwork. I'm like wow. Like I really just want to be able to get to a certain point of fandom or I guess fame. Like it's not really for the fame, but just to like get like that kind of stuff made. Like that's my favorite kind of stuff. Like I think it's so cool. So, I love it.
Yeah, yeah, I love it too, and I'm glad that it's happening for you that way as well.
Mm.
Yeah, so one other question that I do have is what are some of your hobbies outside of wrestling when you're not working so hard at being the top guy? What do you like to do?
Things that I love to do. Man, it really is a whole lot of just working out. Like I've always loved to train. I've always loved to work out. Like I love weightlifting. Like I just came back from the gym like right before I hopped on this podcast, but yeah, I love weightlifting, but video games. I love video games. I know it's supposed to be a generic answer, but I love video games. Like as a kid, like before I was really like, oh, maybe I'll become a professional wrestler, or like whatever. Like I was like, you know what, one day I would definitely love to make my own video game. And it's like really hard to make a video game. I totally understand that. That's like a very like oh, it's like just make a video game. But like, I would love to like come up like and create the idea for like a video game. Like I've always loved to write. English was always like my best subject, but I love reading. I've always loved like reading novels as a kid, and I've been like for a little bit I kind of wasn't like reading that much at all. But over the past like year, I've been like reading just like in my spare time a lot more because, at a certain point, I really do get a headache like looking at my phone all day. So it is like really nice to like read, and like really like use your imagination. And like, cause I think it is like a real skill to have a vivid imagination or like be able to like visualize things in your mind. I think that's like obviously kids are able to do it really well, but I think like keeping that part of your brain like active is like, I think that really helps. I think that like helps you keep like a positive outlook and like a positive mindset if you're able to like really keep your mind like like engaged. So I love to read, I love playing video games, and I love playing basketball. I'm not good at all. I am like probably not even a quarter decent, but you know what, I'm half white. I can shoot pretty good jumpers. I got great fundamentals, really good at like distributing the basketball. I can pass. I'm great energy on defense, but so I love to play basketball too. So whenever I get the chance, I like to go like play pickup with like friends or whatever like that, or just like have guys over. I have like a hoop at the house, so I love to play basketball too.
Okay, those are really cool hobbies. It's so funny you mentioned basketball. Like me and my mom used to play baseball together all the time when I was little. Like that was my
Oh yeah.
thing. Like because I love the Atlanta Braves because my grandma and my auntie loved them, so I love them too. So I would like try to like play baseball with like this like styrofoam bat and a ball that my mom got from Pizza Hut, and I would just
Nice.
play and just hit the ball constantly every day. And my mom would be like, "Look, okay, I'm tired," but we'd be out there for like hours, even after she would get off from work, and I would just do that, because I had it in my mind that I could be a baseball star, but then I fell out of interest with it and just started doing other things. But I totally get, doing that to kind of just have fun and just kind of cut loose a bit. And I like to read as well, except I find I love to buy books now more than I actually dedicate time to read it because I
Oh
have
really?
two different platforms going on at the same time in wrestling. So it's just kind of like to find time to read is just kind of hard. Then college low key burned me out from it too. So, but I still love books. I love the idea of having them, but it's just the idea of reading them and making time to do it. It's just really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. Like I know it's usually like I really like to read during the summer when I go to like the beach. Like
Mhm.
I will spend the entire time just like reading a book on the beach. Like that is like really when like I get most of the reading done. Because like, I'm in college right now, so I'm reading textbooks every day. And so,
Yeah.
at a certain point, it's just like, dude, I am done reading. I would really love just my mind to turn into a vegetable and just like scroll through YouTube shorts. I have no shame. I have no shame. At a certain point, I'm just like, man, I am burnt out. I just don't want to do any more reading. But I
Yeah.
love to read. It's really like during the summertime, and like I'm about to go on Christmas break, so I might read a little bit. Put a little time aside to read. Just keep the mind keep it lubricated.
Yeah, definitely. I get that. So, how would you say you feel about the state of independent wrestling or just wrestling as a whole, and what's good about it and what can be improved upon it, in your opinion?
Mm, mm. What's good about it is that I think it's definitely on the upswing. I think the business of wrestling is really controlled at the top. So when the big companies, so like AEW is doing really well right now, and WWE is really doing really well right now. As
Hmm.
long as like the WWE or like whoever is like the top companies, like as long as they're doing well, the rest of wrestling does well. So I think especially now, like they're getting increasingly more popular, both AEW and WWE. Like they're just really like crossing with that mainstream a lot right now.
Right.
Both of them, which is like really good, and that's really helping the independents a lot. Um, I will say though, I think there's definitely a dynamic shift in independent wrestling. Like almost in a way of like geographically. So like when I'm in the Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey, tri-state area. And when I was a fan, like this whole like that tri-state area was like the biggest, it was like the hub of like independent wrestling to me. At least like the top independent companies, like that's really where they're based out of.
Hmm.
And I mean, you always have PWG in California, but like the main beef of it was in that tri-state area. And while I still think there is a solid core in this tri-state area, like I think that like the Northeast is like really popping off with a lot of wrestling right now for independent wrestling.
Mm.
The Midwest, it used to be like, I mean, they still have like really good companies, but it's kind of just like the volume of like really good companies or like really popular companies has like gone down a little bit, so like I think it's kind of redistributing a little bit more in the South and on the West Coast right now too. Like the West Coast, like you're seeing like a bunch of like companies that are like really getting steam out on the West Coast, and they're getting steam on like like an international to national level. So I think like the West Coast is really popping off geographically right now, and like the Southeast, the South is starting to like get a lot more buzz, whereas like the Midwest and like the Northeast are getting like a little less. But besides that New England area where you have like Limitless, Beyond, Chaotix is a big company out there too. So like, it's kind of redistributing. But like overall, independent wrestling has like gone on a big upswing, especially compared to pandemic times. So everything feels like it's starting to ramp up a little bit more. Like the talent on the independents is like really gone up over the past year as well, with like wrestlers either coming back to the independents or like new people or people who have been around, but they've really gone through like a big like change, or they've really like improved their game. So I think wrestling for the next 5 years is definitely on the upswing, unless we get into like a nuclear war and everything goes away. But I think in general things are looking on the bright side. Things are looking on the bright side in general. Hey, as long as everything just keeps going, like I think everything's gonna be pretty positive, God willing.
Yeah, definitely. Like in wrestling as a whole is just a really giant monster of amazingness. And it's like in the past couple of years since I've been podcasting and since I've been in wrestling myself, it just continues to become like a growing tree. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I just find that I'm just so happy to even be a part of it in some small way. And I just love how everybody is getting opportunities now. Now, of course, everything could be improved like in life, everything can always have some improvement. But the thing about wrestling that I'm finding is that everyone is having a chance to participate in everyone, and there's a place for everyone, even if you can't find it, there's a place for everyone's like taste, if you can't find it in one place. So I think that's the best part about it. And then we're getting to see talents like you and bigger talents who might want to take their talents to smaller places, or smaller places who might want to take their talents to bigger places. Like it's a place for everyone. And I'm glad that that's happening, more so now than ever. Like I love it. It's really cool. So in the chat, we had someone come up with a question that, of course, is a question I was going to get around. This is a place to ask it. So it's WWE fan in the YouTube is saying, when you found out that you were facing Kenta, what was your reaction? Like, you have a really big match coming up, sir, against Kenta, who's like an icon and wrestled everywhere and everybody. Like, how did you feel when you got the news that you were going to be facing him, and how are you preparing for that?
So I didn't know that this was going to be a possibility until like maybe 3 weeks ago. 3 to 4 weeks at the very most. So this has not been in the works for a while. This is like very like last minute, and like relatively this is very last minute. Most of the time you get like something like this, you have at least probably like a few months to like prepare or something like that. So when I was like, hey, like, maybe we'll be able to have Kenta on the December 18th show, I was like, oh wow, that's so soon that I didn't think it really pan out. And then after like a week and a half later, they're like, oh yeah, it's happening for sure. And I'm like, oh wow, oh that's crazy. So like obviously like initial reaction, I think initially I just laughed, like
You laughed?
yeah, initially I just laughed. I was like, being in pro wrestling for the past 5 years, what really taught me that like nothing is set in stone until like it happens. Like you can't, like it's hard to predict. Like obviously you can have your goals, you can work towards your goals, but like things are just gonna happen. Like there is no such thing as like as luck to me. Like luck really is just, you're gonna be given opportunities at certain points, whether you're ready for it or not. It does not matter. You just have to be prepared. And especially over the past year, being able to like really wrestle a lot of like bigger names, like I've been able to wrestle like Rich Swann, JD Drake, like a Fred Yehai. Like I've been able to really test myself this past year. And,
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes you're just going to be given opportunities, and, you can't, you can't freak out about it. You can't lose your cool. You can't, I'm not gonna lie, I freaked out a little bit, but you can't, it can't become like an all consuming thing, because
Right.
especially like being a young pro wrestler and just being a pro wrestler in general, like you are going to have to wrestle some people that might be very intimidating, or at one point you really look up to them, or at one point, like you just thought X, Y, and Z, and you really have to get over that, because if you want to become WWE champion, like everyone wants to be a WWE champion, but like, if you want to be WWE champion, you have to wrestle Roman Reigns,
Right.
and you can't be intimidated by Roman Reigns. He's not going to respect you if you're intimidated by him. I might have to wrestle Brock Lesnar one day. Like I can't cower in the face of Brock Lesnar, and that's the same thing with Kenta. Like he is definitely my number one inspiration as a professional wrestler. I have no doubt in my mind. It's him. It's Bryan Danielson. Those are probably the two guys that like have inspired me the absolute most throughout my entire life. But at the same time, like I'm not trying to lose to him. Like I'm not trying to, have people say like, "Oh, it was cool that Kenta came to CZW." Oh, and yeah, Griffin McCoy, he was there too. He was in that match. Like no, like by the end of next week, like what everyone is going to be talking about is Griffin McCoy. Like they're going to say like, "Wow, like Griffin McCoy is a guy that not only you need to keep an eye on, you are going to see this guy. Like this is not just a hobby for me. Like this is my life. Like I fully expect and plan to become one of the best wrestlers of all time. Like there's no other reason that I'm doing this. Like I really do this to like reach the pinnacle. Whatever I can achieve, I'm going to achieve that. So I've gone like a little off topic, but preparation wise, I haven't really changed up my preparation. Because every day it's pushing yourself, like I push myself every day. Like I'm not going to switch it up, like I'm already pushing myself to the absolute limit. So I've been ready for Kenta, and like at first, I was a little bit scared. I was a little bit nervous, but, I've been scared and nervous in my life before, and it's gone pretty well. And it's actually made me perform better. The pressure really does make me a much better wrestler. Every time I get put into a high pressure situation, that's when the best me comes out. And while it may be very uncomfortable before that, that's what really gets me going. Like those are the situations that I really live for, because that is like a literal pushing out the biggest turd of your life. Can be excruciating. It can be very, I know that's a funny analogy, but like, it really is like that idea of like, like it is going to be painful. It is going to be mentally, emotionally, and physically taxing. But man, the relief afterwards, nothing like it. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I feel supremely confident. I feel supremely confident.
And that's good that you do feel confident and that you have, been preparing, and just the fact it sounds like you are a person and a competitor that rises to each occasion. And it's clear that that's where your mind is at when you're facing against someone like Kenta, who has just faced, everybody. And the fact that he's your number one inspiration is really cool too. But you're not letting that, get in the way of performing at the top aptitude that you perform at. And I think that's very admirable and it's great. And if you keep that mindset, you will go on, to bigger things and go on to face, all the main people like a Roman Reigns or, a Kofi Kingston or Bryan Danielson, at some point. So that's really cool that you're going into that. And I wish I was there to see it, but travel and in New Jersey and Alabama, and I just got back from LA, so I need to chill. But I'm more than sure that it's going to be a fantastic match. So
Yes, it will be fantastic, and it will also be for everyone. I will put my left nutsack on this. I will be posted on YouTube no more than 2 weeks later. You know, it will be on CZW Studios, the streaming service. It's $9.99 a month. It's pretty good to get a lot of content, but I know everyone doesn't want to subscribe to another thing. But I will guarantee that match will be put on YouTube after the fact, you know, within the next week or two after it goes up. So, you know, keep an eye out for that. It will be uploaded. Even if I get knocked down in 3 seconds, it'll be put up, you know. It'll be up there. So it will be available to watch.
Great, great. That's fantastic. So, who would you say are your top 5 wrestlers of all time, whether they be male, female, or non binary?
Top 5 wrestlers of all time. Probably Triple H number 1.
Hmm.
Maybe all time. Probably Triple H number 1. Bryan Danielson / Daniel Bryan. Kenta maybe number 3. I think 2 and 3 are pretty interchangeable. Like that's 2A, 2B. But if we're really gonna keep it like 1, 2, 3, that's just how I'm feeling right now. 4, probably definitely Randy Orton. And 5, I would say, man, who am I number 5? Man? Number 5, this is kind of like an interchange, like a rotating 5. But I would say right now, Roderick Strong. Strong, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. He's probably my number 5 right now.
Okay, that's a pretty solid top 5. Very technically sound. I like that a lot.
Yes.
And big ups to Randy Orton. We're wishing him healing at this point because if he has to retire next year, I will cry. It'll just be
I know, right? That would be terrible. Oh my god.
I was raised with like my whole life is well, not my whole life, but a half of my life he was there, and for him to not be there and have to possibly retire, that would literally break my heart in two. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know that'd be terrible. But, you know, I will say this: even if he does retire, like sports medicine is so crazy nowadays. Like you know, like a Bryan Danielson or like an Edge, like, you know, if they were like a couple decades before, if like they were like, you know, big in like the 90s or like the 80s, like, you know, they would never have gotten back in the ring. But obviously, like, they returned after like, you know, cervical spine neck injuries. So I mean, if they can do that, like, you know, even if Randy Orton has to take some time off to heal his body, I'm sure one day that he would come back, because that dude, like, you, especially like watching like the recent, like, you know, he did like the Peacock thing and like a few things that he's done recently, like that dude, like he loves professional wrestling. Like just seeing the love that he has professional wrestling is like truly inspiring. Because like I've always known like Randy Orton, like obviously you can't be a WWE superstar if you don't like to wrestle. But like really seeing like the passion he still has for professional wrestling for as long as he's been doing it, that's really an inspirational thing to see as like a young wrestler. So, you know, I really hope that he rests up and he comes back better than ever.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. So, what would you say is the greatest thing that wrestling has given you so far in your life?
The greatest thing? Oh yeah, it's easy. All the relationships I've been able to build through professional wrestling. You know, like moving around a lot as like a kid. I always had like great friends, great family, support system. But, you know, you move around a little bit and like, you know, you go out of touch with people and like, you know, you're not as close as you once were. And like, that's cool. That's a part of life. But like, it's crazy going into professional wrestling, and especially now, like going like in 5 years, and like seeing a lot of dudes that like I was coming up with, like, you know, like named out a few, like Tristan Ty, Gabe Sky, Desmond Cole, you know, my one boy Action Andretti, you know, we've met over the past couple of years and he's really coming up recently. Like my friends, you know, like Ellis Taylor, Charlie Tiger, Jordan Oliver, like they're all like doing their thing and like making relationships with people. Like from like, I know dudes who like live overseas, or like I've met some like Canadian wrestlers and like, oh, like they're cool people. Like we follow each other on Instagram, and like, you know, like I wrestled this one kid, Leon Slater, like a few weeks ago at JCW, then at GCW, and he's like from the UK, and he's like, you know, young prodigy, you know, like, and like it's just really cool, like being able to meet like really different people. And like, especially in professional wrestling, like there is such a wide range of people from like completely different backgrounds with like completely different stories. But like like I've really established like lifelong bonds where if like there have been guys who I haven't seen in like maybe like a year or two, but if I saw them like right now, like nothing would change. Like nothing would have been changed. It'd be like the same exact vibe as it always is. So I think like, being able to establish these relationships with people that like you never would have met or like never would have known through like, unless you were in wrestling, like has definitely been the most, you could never put a price tag on that for me. Like those are the most like invaluable experiences.
Definitely. Like, I completely understand and identify with that. Like, because in wrestling, you have a tendency to grow bonds with people, and your family just continues to get bigger with that shared interest and with that shared bond. So I'm really glad that you have been given that in your wrestling journey. And I just cannot wait to see what the future has for you, Griffin. Like, you're facing off against Kenta. You're
Yes.
continually to get better and train to get to the highest level, and you have a good mindset to make your dreams come true. And I'm just so happy that you were able to come on my show like today. I'm so happy that we were able to have this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the Hardy Wrestling podcast. So if you don't mind telling everybody, where they can find and follow you on social media and what you've got cooking up, of course.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Griffin McCoy, all one word. It's the same thing for both Twitter and Instagram. That's where you can really find me. That's why I'm always on. I'm not really on MySpace or Pinterest, but I am on Instagram and Twitter. And obviously, this weekend, this Sunday, that's the biggest thing I got going on. I'm wrestling Kenta December 18th. If you are in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, wherever area, it'll be at 110 Harmon Drive, Blackwood, New Jersey. We have free beer. Not only will you see Kenta versus Griffin McCoy, we have the SAT, we have Lindsay Dorado, we have Fred Yehai. It will be an incredible show. So pull up, and if you don't pull up, definitely watch the replay on YouTube. And if you gotta, go on CZW Studio. Yes, and thank you for having me on too. This has been awesome. This has been a great experience.
Oh, I'm glad you feel that way. Thank you for coming. I'm very honored to have had you. Now, of course, if you are watching on any one of my platforms, thank you for watching. And of course, you can find and follow me, your girl Stephanie Hardy, on Instagram and Twitter at Queen Steph Hardy. Listen to the Hardy Wrestling Podcast and watch this interview on YouTube and everywhere video wise. You can watch it on here. You can watch it on my Facebook as well. And then the audio version will probably be available before this week is out. So thank you guys for supporting the Hardy Wrestling Podcast with your girl Stephanie Hardy. And until next time,